This video is a request, sort of. Initially, the requested video was about ESFPs and boredom, so I made it more broad to cover all of the types, but we'll dwell on ESFPs more than usual. INFJs. INFJs tend to get bored by actions without analysis. Situations where they're doing constantly, but not really analysing, reflecting, or thinking about what they've done. In small doses, this is very healthy and desirable for INFJs. It gets them out of their head, but when it is prolonged, it can become immensely tedious for INFJs. Just doing stuff and getting nothing more from those things beyond the experience itself feels like sand slipping through their hands, or water slipping through, or time, or something. It feels surface level to them, and I think that lack of depth, at least in their view, is the boredom inducer. I've often thought of NI as existing anywhere but the present moment, so analysing the past, projecting patterns forward into the future to plan and predict, or pondering abstract ideas that are detached from time. So the present moment is both a necessary avenue for respite for INFJs, but also something that INFJs get bored by eventually. ENFJs. ENFJs love the spark and electricity that comes from the interplay, the give and take, the push and pull, and reciprocal energy inherent in interactions with people. Counter to the perception of ENFJs that introverts might have, ENFJs are not fans of shallow interactions with people. They want deep connections. If they're in situations where they have to deal with completely impersonal things, it can get boring for them very quickly. Both NFJ types love to relate whatever they're working on back to, if not people as such, then definitely psychology. This is a pattern I've seen play out in practice, but it also makes sense since they both have FE as a main function, which is fundamentally people-focused. ENFJs achieve great things in their more insular and introverted moments. They don't need people to excel. It's just that they enjoy them. It's an opportunity for them to be at their best most easily and effortlessly. To be deprived of that possibility is to risk the colourless cloud of boredom floating over ENFJs. ENTPs. What makes ENTPs bored? Well, everything, eventually. There's three categories that come to mind for ENTP boredom, which can be cured by either new problems and puzzles to solve, new people to interact with, or new areas of study. Problems and puzzles can also be thought of as new challenges. These can range from intense and ambitious aims, such as some entrepreneurial venture, to more simple goals that they want to achieve in their day-to-day life. ENTPs are often described as innovators, and that is apt, but they are equally problem solvers as well. After all, innovation necessitates it. Interacting with new people gives ENTPs a lot. New perspectives, life philosophies, even new values. ENTPs are often captivated by people who strongly attach themselves to certain arbitrary values because it is alien to them. New people are also a new audience, intellectual combatant, and adventurous conduit all in one. So what's not to like? New areas of study appeal to the academic side of ENTPs, which is, in some form, always present for them. Curiosity can lead to adventures, yes, but also to the acquisition of knowledge. For ENTPs, that is every bit as appealing. All of these activities allow ENTPs to either acquire new information or to use existing knowledge in new ways. Ideally both at the same time. If both of these boxes are ticked, then ENTPs will avoid boredom, for the most part. INTPs. INTPs are bored when they're not sufficiently stimulated intellectually. INTPs' brains are ticking over endlessly, like a heartbeat or breathing. So if there isn't enough coming into their minds, it feels like they have a weapon that is being underutilized. This means that daily life is like a minefield of boredom. Every conversation fraught with the mind-numbing threat of small talk, jobs that discourage their piercing logic, and an education system that often pushes the wrong kind of learning, at least in the view of INTPs. So INTPs need multiple research rabbit holes to burrow down at any given point. Otherwise, they get intellectually restless. It's essential for INTPs to have variety in this area as well. As I've mentioned before, there is what I call in-between-the-tabs knowledge. When you have 2 or 200 tabs open, you're not just gaining knowledge from what's in them, but also from what arises from merging the information together. It's emergent knowledge. So INTPs don't just want information and knowledge from one area or two areas, they want that emergent knowledge as well, that comes from combining different areas of study. There's a scene from the Jeremy Brett incarnation of Sherlock Holmes that feels oddly applicable to the INTP brand of boredom. I regret Moriarty's death, because without him, I have to deal with distressed children, cat owners, pygmies of triviality. It speaks to a detached intellectual purism on some level, despite the fact that he is evil. Sherlock would like Moriarty back, because he was simply more interesting and mentally stimulating. ESFPs. ESFPs are a type who require a great deal of stimulation in life. This is a two-way street though. They can either be on the receiving end of something exciting and exhilarating, or exerting themselves upon the world in a more outgoing way. Both of those things bring about the same results, i.e., function as cures for boredom. ESFPs have a kinetic energy to them that needs to go somewhere. It's like trying to capture lightning. It needs to be channeled and focused. Otherwise, it can become quite destructive. So what makes ESFPs bored? Any activity where the time between action and impact is long. The most regularly used example is planning, but that is just one instance. It's any activity that delays impact and results, and to an extent, delays gratification, but that doesn't have to have a negative slant to it. It's why ESFPs, and certain other types, love spontaneity. It's not because they like random and unexpected things, as such, but because it allows them to have an idea, then do it. Not have a cool idea, plan it all out, call their friends to come along, realize they know too many introverts who don't want to join them, and giving up on the whole thing. Think, act. That's what they love. Any activity that meets that criteria will cure their boredom. What's great about having the psychology that ESFPs do is that a great many activities in life will actually meet their boredom curing criteria. Having a chat with someone, playing a game. Incidentally, from personal experience, ESFPs might be the most hilarious type to play cards and board games with. Going for a drive, having a meal out, having a night out, going for a long walk. You get the idea. In that sense, ESFPs are a type who are very appreciative of life. They can enjoy crazy and simple pleasures equally. I've mentioned before that I think the ideal or fully realized ESFP life is one where they can have a sense of direction that also encompasses these more immediate tasks and actions that they can focus on. It's like having an overarching strategy or war campaign that the individual battles are playing into. They can focus on the tactical requirements of those battles and fully immerse themselves in the intensity of the moment, but when that's done, they are not left with a gaping hole of boredom, but rather a next step to leap to on their path. I think the extent to which an ESFP can succeed in life actually depends a great deal on whether they can tolerate boredom, whether they can delay that need for impact and results and action. If they can, it will make them much more measured, pointed, and effective. When you possess something that is powerful but volatile, most of your effort should go into channeling that, wrestling control of it. An ESFP who can fight their own boredom is a dangerous foe and a force to be reckoned with. ENFPs. ENFPs struggle with meaningless repetition. That is perhaps the most uninspiring thing they could do, if they have to do the same task over and over, but it's in service of something that's worthwhile to them, they can be fine with it. In fact, ENFPs will do exactly this. They'll build in systems and procedures to automate as much of the mundane stuff as possible. After all, they can be quite ESTJ-like, especially as time goes on. If you imagine two categories of people, one group find a way of doing something that works and works well, and then repeat that often, and only shake things up if truly necessary. The other group will do that same activity or task differently each time, and in turn will have many failures and methods that don't work, but also have more of a chance of discovering something innovative and unorthodox that gets amazing results. ENFPs are of course in the latter category, so being forced to do the same thing again and again without taking chances, pushing the boat out, and trying something out of left field is mind-numbing for them. It saps the excitement out of life. For ENFPs, variety is less the spice of life and more the point of it. There's also a strange kind of meta thing that goes on with ENFPs and boredom. I think that ENFPs get bored when they are not allowed to get bored, or are punished and thought of negatively for getting bored. Changing your mind is actually a huge strength. But to onlookers and people close to you, it might get annoying. You might seem flippant, too changeable, and lacking discipline. To be fascinated by something, then drop it suddenly and move on is great. Why not? ENFPs should definitely not listen to people who insist that they stick with everything they start. Being changeable, although frustrating at times, is an asset if it's used in the right way. Boredom can be a very powerful tool for growth. INFPs. It hadn't occurred to me before, but boredom might be something that is common for INFPs, or at least more common than is often mentioned. INFPs seek out meaning. What does that mean? Yes, we are 3 sentences into an INFP part and already talking about the meaning of meaning. For your actions to have meaning, it needs to matter that you are the person who did it, that some level of individual agency and personal contribution was significant. Imagine you helped someone out and went out of your way to do so, then found out that someone else would have done the exact same thing that you did anyway. Yes, you still did a good thing, but some of the personal meaning would be lost. You are still just a bit part in a play that would go on without you. So INFPs might find themselves often bored by how replaceable much of what we do in life actually is. The cure to this, then, is simple, although rarely easy. It's to give voice to their own unique feelings and thoughts, to act or create in ways that feel individual and therefore meaningful. If they have enough of that in their life, the feeling of boredom will be held off. ESTPs. ESTPs, like a few other types, have a curious nature when it comes to boredom. They are simultaneously prone to feeling bored, yet also great at conjuring up fun and excitement out of nothing. So it's a strange existence, where they're always moments away from life seeming dull or exhilarating, depending on the situation. I sometimes mention that types are generally good at both versions of their top 2 functions. ESTPs, therefore, can find enjoyment in SI-like activities as much as SE ones. What is an SI activity? Well, when it comes to leisure activities, it's about comfort, chilled out vibes, indulging in known pleasures, going to your favorite restaurant, slipping back into whatever metaphorical or literal old coat feels right. Although SE, much like NE, does desire new experiences and variety, in my personal experience with the ESTPs, they aren't chasing novel adventures all the time. They tend to be more than happy to enjoy predictable and simple pleasures. So I think that ESTPs are surprisingly well placed to avoid boredom. However, much of the time in life, we don't have complete agency or complete autonomy. Other people restrict and even control us, in some sense. ESTPs get bored when people shut down options and say no to things. Since ESTPs can be impulsive and like to pounce on ideas that come to them in the moment, when people say no to suggestions, it shuts down so much activity in their life. ESTPs are masters of getting the ball rolling. They might suggest going out somewhere, which in itself won't be anything spectacular. But once you're out, something fun or unusual might happen. There might be some opportunity to seize upon. Maybe you will meet new people or realize there's an event on somewhere. There is this snowballing effect. It's about generating momentum through sheer energy and force of will. That makes them feel alive. So ESTPs will be thoroughly bored by someone who says no at the earliest suggestion. This can also be the case in a workplace. After all, rules, regulations, red tape, and bureaucracy are all about saying no. So those things can bore ESTPs as well. ISTPs. ISTPs get bored when they're not getting better at things, when they're not learning, growing, and mastering something. Let's say they find themselves in a job where they're having to work non-stop and get things done by deadlines, and therefore have little time to study the craft of what they're doing. That situation will either drive them nuts or bore them to tears, if ISTPs were capable of forming tears. For ISTPs, if they aren't getting better at something, or doing something well, it feels monotonous and dull. It isn't mentioned about them often, but in that sense, ISTPs always want personal growth. They need that sense of development and progress. Let's just state the obvious as well. ISTPs will get bored of pretty much everyone if they start invading their lives too much. If you're someone who keeps the interest of an ISTP long term, consider it high praise indeed. ISFJs. ISFJs are practical problem solvers. They want activity, action, and impact. Again, very reminiscent of SE, despite them being SI DOMs. They want to have tangible effects on things, so when they are forced to dwell on speculative things, it feels totally pointless to them and boring. Importantly though, ISFJs spend a great deal of time simulating possibilities and speculating upon many potential outcomes, but they do it for a reason, to act upon it. Either to make it happen, or to stop something undesirable happening. In that way, they can be very similar to INFJs and INTJs. The point is that each type uses many functions, often. But our function stack dictates what we prefer and prioritize. ISFJs then will spend time in any mode, so to speak, but on their terms, for as long as they feel it's necessary. Then they get back on with taking action. ISFJs rarely take a mindless approach to anything. They're always observant and receptive to problems that arise, and want to solve them as soon as they can. ISFJs also tend not to like one-off or one-and-done type things. I see them more as builders, so to speak. People who like to pile one achievement or success on top of the last one in a way that accumulates. So they'll also get bored when unable to do this. An example might be something like freelance work, where you might have various projects that are fun, but they're disjointed and are not holistically connected to each other. The individual achievements might feel great, but they're not building something cohesive. After a while, I think that gets boring for them. ESFJs. ESFJs are bored by the impersonal and dispassionate. I imagine a workplace where everyone acts like colleagues and nothing more to be quite unsettling for an ESFJ. That aloofness and distance seems unnatural and even unhuman to them. Can ESFJs be detached and pragmatic? Of course, yes. But when they see people adopt that mindset, in the absence of warmth and emotional connection, to them, it seems almost forced and put on. Since, how can someone actually be devoid of those things? If ESFJs don't have that to latch on to, they get bored. Things feel lifeless. That's not to say that ESFJs can't deal with the detached thinkers of the world. In fact, they often do great at bringing out different sides of those people. When someone is resistant to that, or they find themselves in environments that discourage that, it's dull for them. ENTJs. ENTJs are bored by waiting. ENTJs are not just people who desire efficiency and speed, they're also personally impatient as well. This really is a salient trait that I've seen ENTJs, many of them, have in common. It's hard for them, even at the best of times, i.e. when it's normal to wait for a thing, but when it's unnecessary waiting, then it's complete tedium for them. ENTJs also need a constant stream of stimulation. They need something to put their energy towards. In that sense, unlike other types, they need goals as an excuse to plow ahead towards something. Like their NI generates goals for their TE to organize towards. So ENTJs have a conflicted dynamic with boredom. On the one hand, they are planners who are capable of waiting a long time until those plans come to fruition, but if they have nothing to do, they'll go stir crazy. So there's an endless balance to be struck for ENTJs. ENTJs are also bored by, well, hearing about people's opinions constantly. If there's a situation where someone is expressing loads of strongly held views, or even worse, complaining, but isn't really taking any action based on that stuff, it will drive them quite nuts. All talk and no action bores ENTJs. INTJs. INTJs need their thoughts to be, provoked. They inhabit the abstract, conceptual, and metaphysical realm frequently. For some INTJs, they'd rather be there most of the time. So there are categories of real-world actions and activities for INTJs. Stuff that you have to do, i.e. basic life stuff. Then there's stuff that plays into a bigger plan or strategy or aim, actions that are purposeful and intentional. Great. Then there's everything else. That tends to be the stuff that bore INTJs. Because of this, INTJs can look totally neglectful or completely obsessive about the things in their life, depending on which state you see them in. Anything that INTJs are neglecting is something they find boring by default. In that sense, it is exceptionally easy to figure out what INTJs are bored by. I mean, they'll just tell you, bluntly. And if they aren't telling you, or talking to you, then, they probably find you boring. ISFPs. ISFPs get drained and bored when they need to spend lots of time worrying about optics, by which I mean what other people think about them. Imagine a scenario where there's drama between a group, there's gossip, and people are playing politics. That's going to bore them to tears, perhaps literally. ISFPs are going to be good at FE-esque things, but not when that comes at the expense of being authentic. They can be empathetic, deeply so, but they never want to be disingenuous, false, or phony, so there's a limit to how much they'll use that skill. Imagine a period drama, one where societal norms, the maintenance of appearances, and endless silly social dynamics are at play. That's a terrible environment for ISFPs, which I think is why they often make great protagonists as characters in these situations. I think it relates to unnecessary restraint and repression, two things that rob ISFPs of their vitality. For some reason, ISFPs don't have the same reputation for brutal bluntness and straight talking as some of the thinking types do, but they deserve it every bit as much, if not more so. So situations or environments that insist on repression, tongue-biting, and falseness really bore ISFPs. You might think, well, how common is that? I would say very common, in fact. So it might take ISFPs quite a while in life to find their place where they won't be bored or annoyed. ISTJs. ISTJs dislike and are bored by frivolous things and activities. If an ISTJ deems something as pointless, then they'll be bored by it very quickly. Like ISFJs, I see them as builders, in some sense, who want whatever they engage in to be worthwhile, meaningful, and useful. Whenever I ask an ISTJ what they've been up to, and given the people I know, these tend to be adult ISTJs, so this might take a while to be the case for younger ISTJs, they will list off a bunch of activities, all of which have some function or utility. Even when they're just chilling out and meeting up with people, that too seems somewhat purposeful in their eyes. It's not done just for the sake of it. In that way, ISTJs have an elegant efficiency to them, a stoic tendency for the foregoing of unnecessary things. This minimalism, if I can call it that, allows them to streamline their life. They make every step count. I bring up this example a lot about an ISTJ family member who clearly values regularly meeting up with many people in the family, but tends to abruptly get up and leave very quickly, as soon as it floats into that space of it being, in his view, frivolous. Once he's caught up with people, has gotten the salient news from everyone's life, and knows what we are all up to, and that everything is fine, job done. I think ISTJs also get bored by going with the flow for similar reasons. To them it feels aimless, and they want more structure in their lives at all levels. ESTJs. Being idle and lazy is impossibly boring for ESTJs. I think it has a psychologically negative effect beyond that. Almost like the restlessness boils up and spills over, and is visible in their level of agitation and aggression. If you wanted to torture an ESTJ, then lock them up with nothing to do, and have an ever-increasing to-do list read out to them with each passing day. I'm not saying that ESTJs are opposed to chilling out and relaxing. It's just that they, rarely do them. They can do play mode, but they tend to fluctuate between that and the more common work mode. ESTJs live a relentless existence, at least to onlookers. As I've remarked before, it can seem like a satisfactionless way to live, where one task completed or victory won is short-lived as they move ceaselessly onto the next thing. ESTJs, given the balance they have with SI and NE, will get bored by too much variety and spontaneity and too much repetition. So it's a balancing act for them to make sure they're both structured but also stimulated. If you are feeling bored right now, then, well, that's probably a sign that you didn't enjoy the video, so subscribing wouldn't make any sense. So, yeah.